One of the favorite stories told in the Bible is that of the young shepherd boy Joseph and his coat of many colors, given to him by his beloved father and envied by his brothers.
And when they saw Joseph, they conspired against him to slay him. Behold, let us slay him, and cast him into a pit where we will say some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what shall become of his dreams. Genesis 37:20.
Blessed with the gift of foretelling the future from his dreams, how could Joseph's visions ignite a hatred so intense within his 10 brothers that they conspire to murder him?
One of the great mysteries of the story of Joseph is how out of this story of hatred and sibling rivalry and slavery and prison and all of these terrible things that happen to a family, you end up with a people that is blessed by God.
Was this dramatic story of a family torn apart by rivalry fact or fiction? And how could Joseph, an unknown outsider, rise to the heights of power in one of the world's mightiest kingdoms? These are but a few of the mysteries of the Bible. Modern-day Israel, north of Jerusalem. No gentle or forgiving place, the ancients called this region Canaan. Even today, nomadic tribes barely eke out an existence here, totally dependent on sparse seasonal rainfall. At times, the earth, blighted by years of drought, yields little. So the people who call this hard-scrabble terrain home must pull up stakes and move on. The book of Genesis tells of the patriarch Jacob, who believes he has lost his favorite son Joseph to wild beasts. Jacob is the grandson of Abraham and lives with his 11 remaining sons about 1,800 years before the birth of Christ. Forced from their homeland by starvation, 10 of his sons begin a long trek southward in search of food and better pastures. They had long heard of Egypt, breadbasket of the region, and of its life-giving source, the River Nile. Its lure pervades their dreams and their hopes. So, one day they set off in quest of storehouses filled with grain. From their village, called Shechem, the brothers travel 400 miles across burning hot sands. They finally reach Egypt. Here, great stone monuments proclaim the enduring power of the realm. Egypt was the dominant force in the ancient Near East, and had been so for untold centuries. Egypt's towering monoliths must have been a welcome sight to the band of weary travelers. But as the exhausted brothers enter the kingdom, it is clear that all is not well. For even here in Egypt itself, famine and hunger rack the land.
And the 7 years of famine began to come. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. Genesis 41:55.
The specific span of time, which is mentioned in the Joseph story, 7 years of good crops, 7 years of lean crops, is rather interesting because it does have a parallel in a stela, that is a monument which is set up with an inscription on it.
The Nile has not come in my time for a space of 7 years. Grain was scant, fruits were dried up, and everything which they ate was short. From an Egyptian stele during the reign of King Joseph.
Although exact dates are difficult to ascertain, archaeologists have found extensive evidence that droughts and famines occurred in distinct cycles during biblical times.
Throughout Egyptian history at different times, we know from records in tomb biographies that there were lean years. There's a whole book written on famines in ancient Egypt. The Egyptian nobility frequently in their tombs talk about these lean years and how people were hungry, and so I opened my granary, I fed the poor myself, and so on. We know this was a periodic problem for Egypt.
There is one man in Egypt, the viceroy, who has the power to unlock the national granaries and distribute food.
And the sons of Israel came to buy corn, and there was the governor of all the land, and it was he that sold to all the people of the land. And the brothers came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. Genesis 42:6.
Unbeknownst to the 10 brothers, the powerful figure from Pharaoh's royal court is a foreigner like themselves. Though they do not recognize him, he is none other than their long-lost brother, Joseph, whom they sold into slavery some 20 years before. Fate seems to take a perilous turn for the worse when he accuses them of coming into Egypt as spies.
And they said, "We are all one man's sons. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies." Genesis 42:13.
The hapless brothers bow down before the viceroy, pleading for mercy. For a seemingly unknown purpose, the viceroy begins to question them about their aged father Jacob, still living in Canaan.
And he asked them, "Is your father well, the old man of whom ye spake? Is he alive yet?" Genesis 43:27.
And thus, apparently out of nowhere, a stranger in a strange land asks the brothers about their father. Without realizing it, they have come face to face with their past, their own brother whom they betrayed long ago. The journey of the 10 brothers to Egypt begins 40 years before a great famine grips the land of Canaan. It is then that their father, Jacob, wanders the hill country of northern Mesopotamia in search of a wife. Jacob goes to the home of his uncle, Laban, who has 2 eligible daughters. Bewitched by the beauty of Rachel, younger of the 2, he asks for her hand in marriage. In exchange for his consent, Laban demands that Jacob work for him for the next 7 years. On the wedding night, the bride is brought to Jacob's tent, her face hidden behind a veil. But next morning, Jacob is shocked to discover that it is not Rachel who is in his bed, but her sister, Leah.
The story with the uncle Laban, the mean father-in-law, is almost humorous, but he does not want Jacob to marry the young, pretty daughter. He wants the oldest daughter to be married first, and so he pulls a little switch, and again we sort of chuckle at how that might have happened.
Tricked into wedlock with the wrong woman, Jacob relents to working 7 more years to win the hand of the woman he really loves. In this region of the ancient Near East, it is not unusual for a man to have more than one wife.
So here you have Jacob married to two women, two sisters, and clearly he only wanted to marry one, Rachel. As it turns out, Leah is very productive. I call her fertile myrtle. Every time you turn around, she was pregnant. She had children and children, but Rachel did not have children. And then when she finally does, that firstborn is Joseph.
The woman for whom Jacob had labored for 14 years finally conceives a son.
For Jacob, it must have been that much more rewarding as it was for Rachel to have a child after so much pain and anguish and hope. And there is a sense in which there's a build-up that is inside of Rachel all this time. It's as if you were gestating not a normal child, but a heroic child, and that's why it took so long for Joseph finally to make his appearance in the world.
And so it was that of all his sons, from the very moment of birth, Joseph would become Jacob's favorite.
I think that the relationship between Joseph and his brothers draws on the realities of family conflict. I mean, how does it feel to be the sons of the wife that father really didn't love as much?
The truth is that parents do favor children. They say they don't, but they can't help it. There are some children who are just more in line with what you hope for, what you believe, and as much as you try as a parent not to, sometimes things sneak through.
From the moment that Joseph makes his appearance in the world, there is something about him that destines him for greatness. The problem is that he seems to know that too.
Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him. Genesis 37:4.
Many of the details of the Joseph story can be illustrated by history and archaeology. For instance, you have the coat of many colors, which is a striking reference. As a matter of fact, we have an Egyptian wall painting from Beni Hassan, dated about 1900 BCE, which shows a party of 37 Asiatics coming down into the Egyptian delta. It calls them Asiatics, and so we know who they are. They're from somewhere in Canaan or Palestine, and many of them wear long garments, multicolored garments that sound very much like the biblical reference.
Attractive as the rainbow-colored coat was, it may have sparked enmity between Joseph and his brothers.
It was showing favoritism, it was elevating Joseph's status, and as the younger one in a patrilineal society, this of course was taboo, that the younger one should somehow be elevated to a position of supremacy over older ones.
According to the custom of many ancient societies, it is the oldest son who inherits his father's name, title, and property. But Jacob breaks with tradition.
The presentation of this very special garment to his young son Joseph, I think, gives us some interesting parts of the story. For one thing, Jacob seems totally oblivious to the fact that he's pouring gas on the fire in terms of the relationship between his many sons.
Then, as now, sibling rivalry plagued certain families, and Joseph was to ignite even deeper feelings of hostility within his brothers.
And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his brethren, "Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose. And behold, your sheaf stood round about, and bowed down to my sheaf." Genesis 37:7.
If his first dream were not enough to enrage his brothers, Joseph dreams another, in which the stars represent his brothers and the sun and moon his parents. All bow humbly before him.
I think we'd have to say that Joseph doesn't seem to be relishing his role. He seems to be almost oblivious to the fact that what he's saying is enraging his brothers. He seems to be sort of just simply enjoying his awareness that his destiny appears to him to be for greatness.
Modern-day psychologists are fascinated by the possibility that dreams may be able to open a door to the unconscious. In ancient times, too, it was an intriguing topic.
The science of interpreting dreams was very important in the ancient world. We have dream books from Egypt and from Mesopotamia that would do the heart of Freud good.
Did Joseph's dreams merely reflect his superior attitude, or were they perhaps foretelling his bitter future relationship with his brothers?
Frankly, after a while, we begin to identify with the brothers saying, Joseph, would you just shut up? I mean, there's a sense in which we get sick of him as well, and yet the fact of the matter is, Joseph had a line on his own destiny. He was aware of something special happening in his life.
One day, when Joseph's brothers are pasturing their flocks in a fertile valley about 60 miles away from their home, Jacob sends Joseph to find them.
And when they saw him afar off, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. Genesis 37:19.
The brothers decide to murder Joseph, and then to tell their father that he has been devoured by a wild beast. But Reuben, reluctant to shed the blood of his own brother, suggests they merely strip Joseph of his clothes and cast him into a deep pit.
I think being thrown into the pit was the great moment of betrayal. In some ways, being thrown into the pit is not about Joseph, it's about his brothers. It shows us their character, all of them, including those who in some ways made half-hearted attempts to save him. I think what it tells you is that in times ancient and modern, jealousy makes people cruel.
Cast into the pit, Joseph is alone and ponders his uncertain destiny. Alone and uncertain of his fate, Joseph remains in the pit while his brothers debate his future. In the distance, they notice a caravan of slave traders. As the merchants approach, Judah suggests selling Joseph. The Bible tells us that the passing traders were Ishmaelites. They purchase Joseph for 20 shekels of silver and depart for Egypt, setting off a dramatic chain of events that will eventually create a great historical figure from a humble slave. Archaeologists have investigated the site where the Bible says Joseph was sold and have found evidence that in ancient times an active slave market probably did exist here.
According to the biblical story, Joseph is sold into slavery by his brothers at a site named Dothan. That's north of Jerusalem in the hill country of Samaria. It's been located and excavated by American excavators, and it was a major site in the 2nd millennium BC.
There were two sources of slavery in Egypt. One was slaves captured in war, and the other, which apparently was of less importance in the Egyptian economy, namely the slave market, the trafficking in human misery. We do have this document from the 18th pre-Christian century, a papyrus document that lists 37 slaves in one household, and that gives an indication of the slave market in Egypt. And a goodly number of those names are Semites. So from that point of view, it does provide a background for the sale of Joseph into slavery from Canaan to Egypt.
The life of the typical slave was depicted in vivid detail on the tomb paintings of wealthy Egyptians.
The POWs were perhaps the most numerous, captives from foreign wars. But also Pharaoh was in the habit of sending messages up to his governors in Canaan and saying, I require so many warm bodies, so many workers, and the regent would be supposed to ship them off as, by return post almost, and how they were rounded up, I don't know, but we do have examples of native peoples actually selling their own people into Egypt as domestics and whatever they would have ended up as in Egypt.
Having sold their brother to the slave traders, Joseph's brothers dip the coat of many colors in goat's blood and take it back to their father Jacob. Forced to confront the loss of his favorite son, his heart is heavy.
And he knew it, and said, "It is my son's coat. An evil beast hath devoured him." And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. But he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I will go down into my grave unto my son, mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Genesis 37:35.
Scholars have been able to trace the route that the slave traders followed as they bore Joseph into Egypt. It was an arduous and difficult journey, nearly 400 miles long, much of it over barren terrain. Two trade routes once extended from Western Asia into Egypt. One was called the Via Maris, the highway that hugged the coast. The other was beyond the Jordan River. It ran from Damascus southward along the Dead Sea and across the Sinai into Egypt. Centuries later, portions of these routes may be the very ones the Israelites will take on their exodus from Egypt to the Promised Land. The Ishmaelites took Joseph to the city where Pharaoh lived. Archaeologists have identified this site as Avaris in the northern delta. It was the capital of an ancient civilization ruled by a people known as the Hyksos. Long a mystery to scholars, many now believe the Hyksos were a Semitic tribe that originated from somewhere in Canaan. They conquered Egypt around the 17th century BCE, and from Avaris their emperor ruled for a little more than 100 years. There is evidence suggesting that the Hyksos Empire corresponds to the period in which the Bible places Joseph in Egypt.
And the excavations show that Asiatics did indeed settle that site somewhere around 1800 BC or earlier, and over a period of time built a large and prosperous city there. Their burial customs, their pottery, their weapons, their building styles all indicate that these people came from somewhere in South Canaan. In that sense, there may be a historical context for the Joseph cycle and the other stories having to do with the sojourn in Egypt and the Exodus.
Elsewhere in the world, other developments are taking place. Across the Atlantic in North America, rural tribesmen craft grooved axes which enable them to clear large plots of land. Meanwhile, in Scandinavia, the practice of sun worship is becoming popular. And in Babylon, systematic planetary observations are recorded and used for divining the future. Joseph is sold to a man named Potiphar, captain of the guard in Pharaoh's army. Potiphar soon recognizes Joseph's abilities and promotes him to the position of overseer of the entire estate.
And it came to pass that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." And she caught him by his garment, and he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. Genesis 39:12.
Angry at having her sexual advances spurned, Potiphar's wife publicly accuses Joseph of attempted seduction.
I think Joseph was probably attractive and young and a little bit exotic and obviously had some spark. I suspect that he was somebody who would attract anyone with a roving eye, and from what we see in the Bible, Potiphar's wife had a lot of time on her hands.
The other side of this, of course, is the whole theme of the temptations of the foreign woman. This is a theme that runs throughout the Bible. The foreign woman is represented as the dangers of foreign religious worship.
I'm sure Joseph was tempted, not only because the Bible says he hesitated, but also in the Hebrew notes for the reading of the Bible, there is a note on that word hesitated that is a sort of triple trill. You sing it up and down 3 times, as if Joseph was wavering. The way you sing it is supposed to recreate Joseph's internal state. And I think that that note is intended to teach us that he came very close to saying yes.
Potiphar is enraged by what he believes to be Joseph's betrayal and has him arrested. Locked in prison, Joseph faces the darkest hours of his life.
Every great spiritual figure has a moment when he or she is broken. And that's Joseph's moment of being broken. A famous rabbi once said, the only whole heart is a broken one. That if somewhere along the line your heart doesn't get broken, then it's never really whole. And I think that every great spiritual figure has to have a moment when they realize their poverty and pain and anguish and brokenness, and then they put themselves back together and come to God renewed and stronger than before. And the imprisonment is Joseph's moment of brokenness.
Joseph finds himself imprisoned for a crime he did not commit, yet he manages to maintain his spirits. The warden of the prison recognizes his potential and places him in charge of his fellow prisoners.
He seems to emerge from these events as a man who places his fate in the hand of God and who goes along with the events trusting that God will see him through.
Joseph learns that 2 of his fellow prisoners are bothered by disturbing nightmares.
They said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. Genesis 40:8.
The Egyptians believed dreams to be communication from the gods. Understanding them is vital. Recalling the prophetic dreams of his youth, Joseph offers to act as an interpreter.
And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph. Behold, a vine was before me, and Pharaoh's cup was in my hand. I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup. Genesis 40:11.
If you had a dream and you were concerned to know its meaning and what the god or goddess was trying to say to you, you would probably make tracks first thing in the morning down to the temple, consult the priest and say, this is what I dreamt. Check out the papyrus, see what it means, what's going to happen.
Joseph predicts that in 3 days the butler will be restored to his job. If the prediction materializes, the butler promises to remember Joseph. Soon another prisoner, this time the Pharaoh's baker, also comes to him for an interpretation of a dream.
I had 3 white baskets on my head, with all manner of baked meats for the Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket. Genesis 40:17.
The baker is not as lucky as the butler. Joseph forecasts that in 3 days he will be hanged. Both predictions prove accurate, and the butler is released from jail, promising that he will tell the Pharaoh of Joseph's prophetic gifts. But 2 long years are to pass before the promise is fulfilled, years in which Joseph languishes in prison. Then one night, Pharaoh himself experiences a haunting dream.
He stood by the river, and behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored cows and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow. And behold, 7 other cows came after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed cows did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat cows. So the Pharaoh awoke. Genesis 41:4.
Pharaoh dreams yet another dream, this time about 7 full ears of corn devoured by 7 lean ears. Deeply troubled by the dream's possible significance, he summons the court priests, but they cannot unravel the meaning of his nightmares. It is then that the butler recalls Joseph's abilities, and he tells Pharaoh. Without delay, Joseph is summoned before the Pharaoh to hear his dreams.
Dreams represent us at our most vulnerable state. Dreams can often represent a direct line into our sense of ourselves, our sense of failure, our sense of self-image. A dream interpreter, therefore, has the ability to see in an unprotected state the mind and soul of the emperor. So therefore, the emperor has to be extremely careful who they're going to allow into their dream world, because that person must be very wise, they must be very circumspect, they must be trusted. But they also must not be a powerful person, because that person has some keys to you. They have some insight into how your soul works.
Realizing that the dreams represent an ominous forecast for the years to come, Joseph predicts that there will be 7 years of plenty in the land, followed by 7 years of famine. One of the earliest recorded texts on dream analysis explains that a bad dream is like a curse. It was the duty of the interpreter to not only decipher its meaning, but also to ward off its consequences. Joseph advises Pharaoh to appoint a minister over all Egypt to ensure that adequate stores of food are put away for the impending famine. Pharaoh is so impressed with Joseph that he entrusts him with the new ministerial role.
And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand and put it upon Joseph's hand, and put a gold chain about his neck. Genesis 41:42.
As the new viceroy, Joseph now sits at Pharaoh's side, an indispensable advisor in all affairs of state. As he had foreseen, Egypt enjoys 7 years of bountiful harvest. The Nile overflows its banks, and the wealth of the country is unparalleled in all the ancient world. Prosperous and secure, Joseph takes for himself an Egyptian wife who bears him 2 sons. After 7 years, the Nile suddenly begins to dry up. Crops do not grow, cattle die of thirst. But Joseph has prepared Egypt well. The granaries and storehouses are full, and food is distributed to the hungry. The drought is so extensive that citizens of neighboring lands are also suffering. They begin a mass migration to Egypt. And so it is that 10 of Joseph's brothers, struggling to survive in the land of Canaan, begin their own pilgrimage to Egypt.
Now when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you keep looking at one another? I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down and buy grain for us, that we may live and not die." Genesis 42:2.
To obtain food, the sons of Jacob seek out Pharaoh's viceroy, who is distributing grain. But they fail to recognize him as Joseph, the brother they sold into slavery 20 years earlier. Joseph recognizes his brothers, but chooses not to reveal his own identity. Instead, he intimidates them by accusing them of coming into Egypt as spies. But after questioning them about the well-being of their family back in Canaan, he allows them to depart with grain in exchange for leaving one of their party behind. So Simeon remains in prison while the rest of the brothers are instructed to return with Benjamin, the youngest. Benjamin, the Bible tells us, is the only other son of Joseph's mother, Rachel.
Then Jacob said, "You know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, surely he has been torn to pieces. And I've never seen him since. If you take this one also from me, and harm comes to him, you will bring down my gray hairs in sorrow." Genesis 44:27.
Joseph is overcome by emotion at the sight of his brother Benjamin, but still he does not reveal his identity. With promises of more grain, he invites the brothers to share a sumptuous meal with him in his palace. When it is time for his guests to take their leave, Joseph instructs his servants to hide a silver goblet in Benjamin's sack. He has devised a test, for he wants to find out if his brothers have altered their dishonest ways after all the years.
I think when Joseph works his test with the brothers, he has really 2 aims. One is he wants to find out if they've changed. He wants to know if in this time they will put themselves out for a brother who's in trouble. But his other point in the test, I think, is frankly to give them back a little bit of what they gave him. Joseph wouldn't be human if he still didn't harbor some anger towards his brothers.
Joseph sends his servants after the brothers to accuse them of stealing the silver cup, but they profess innocence. When their belongings are searched, the cup is found. It is then that one of the most moving scenes in all the Bible takes place. Joseph threatens to retain Benjamin as his slave. At that moment, Judah steps forward to plead mercy on Benjamin's behalf.
We have a father, an old man, and a young brother, the child of his old age. His brother is dead. He alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. If I do not bring him back, then I will bear the blame in the sight of my father all my life. Now, therefore, please let your servant remain as a slave in place of the boy. Genesis 44:33.
It's at the point where Judah offers to suffer on behalf of the youngest brother, Benjamin, that Joseph sees the most profound change in his brothers. The brothers realize that compassion and willingness to suffer on behalf of each other is the highest value. But Joseph too must change.
Joseph, in tears, steps down from his throne and embraces his brothers.
And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. And his brethren could not answer him, for they were troubled by his presence. And Joseph said unto his brethren, Come near to me, I pray you. It was not you that sent me hither, but God. Genesis 45:3.
The reconciliation comes about because Joseph is a different person. He no longer has the desire to prove how wonderful he is, how great he is, how the brothers will bow down to them. There are very few scenes in all of biblical literature that are as touching as Joseph in tears walking down from his throne, thereby putting himself on the same level as his brothers for the first time and saying, "I am Joseph, your brother."
Pharaoh hears of Joseph's reunion with his brothers and encourages him to send for his father so that the entire family can be reunited and settle in Egypt. Eventually, Joseph is to become so assimilated into the culture of Egypt that when his father Jacob dies, he has the body embalmed and gives him a proper Egyptian funeral. Joseph lives out the remainder of his days in prosperity, and upon death, he too is embalmed. The question remains to this day whether the biblical character Joseph actually existed. Archaeologists have found some evidence to indicate that he did. Many believe that Joseph and his wife were once buried in a cave in the Valley of the Kings, 350 miles south of Cairo.
Now, there has been an attempt in recent years by an Egyptian writer to argue that Joseph is in fact to be found in the Cairo Museum. And he, Ahmed Osman is his name, he suggests that Joseph is really the Egyptian official Yuya. Yuya was the father-in-law of King Amenhotep III. And Mr. Osman suggests that it is this man, Yuya, who is the real biblical figure, Joseph.
But it is far more likely that the story as related in the Bible is the accurate one. For it is written that at the time of the Exodus, Moses has the bodies of both Jacob and Joseph transported back to the land of their birth, to the city of Shechem, where they are buried for a second time. This tomb of Joseph was erected in Byzantine times. Although biblical scholars question whether Joseph's bones are actually here, the shrine acts as a reminder of the great role he played in the unfolding destiny of his people. It is, after all, from the lineage of the family of Joseph and his brothers that the nation of Israel and its 12 tribes would emerge.
The Joseph story is, I think, a paradigm for the Jew living in exile. But at the same time, Joseph never loses his identity. He is wise enough to know that he can be in exile, he can be in a foreign land, and still be a man of God.
I do think that part of the Joseph story is a warning about exile. And so it's saying, no matter how much power you think you acquire in another's land, you're always in danger. On the one hand, he achieved greatly. On the other hand, no achievement, as grand as it may be, ensures the safety of the Jew in the land of his dispersion. And that is, unfortunately, a prophecy that for thousands of years proved to be true.
And Joseph said unto his brethren, And God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Genesis 45:7.